about so welcome everybody. We're just going to give another minute for folks to join us.
Sara, did you get my email? What is going on? Well, we'll talk about it some other time, but what the hell is going on?
Are we live right now, Steve?
We are live and
About
being
that
recorded.
We'll be on YouTube.
So let's welcome all of our attendees joining us today. Welcome everybody. Good morning and good evening if you're in Taiwan. This is the Fairbank Center for Chinese Studies at Harvard University. And this event is the Taiwan Studies Workshop, examining the results of the Taiwan elections, recent local elections 2022. We're very glad that you're joining us today. We do need to let you know that this session is being recorded in order for it to be available to those who are not able to make it today. So with that, I'd like to welcome you all and hand it over to Professor Stephen Goldstein, who will be our moderator today. Thank you, Stephen.
Good morning, United States. Good evening, Taiwan. My name is Steve Goldstein. I'm the director of the Taiwan Workshop at the Fairbank Center at Harvard University. This is the final panel of three held by the workshop to discuss the elections in Taiwan that were held on November 26th. The first two, held before the elections, were panels with representatives of the various political parties, as well as a second panel of specialists on Taiwan politics who discussed the nature of the elections and the implications and their possible outcomes. To keep everybody honest, I've asked the same panelists who were asked to discuss the nature of the elections and their possible outcomes to discuss the actual outcomes. And of course, as we know, the actual outcomes were what many considered to be an impressive showing by the Kuomintang, which won the mayoralty in the capital city, Taipei, and also 13 of the 21 contested cities and counties. There's been much analysis of these elections, and I like to think of it in two categories: the what and the why. As far as the what is concerned, the big question is, what do the results tell us about any changes that might be happening in the Taiwan political system? Changes such as the relative strength of the various parties, their geographic balance, their demographic structure, their leadership, their organizational strength, or the attraction of their platforms. The other what, more generally, is what are the clues that the election gives us to the personalities, the issues, and the platforms that will emerge 13 months from now in the island-wide elections for the president and the legislature. And of course, the big what is, what will the political changes over the next 2 years in Taiwan, how will those changes resonate with the mainland and affect mainland policy? Turning to the why, lots of good questions. Why did it come out the way it did? Was it good or bad candidate choices? Was it traditional followings? Was it local organizations? Was it the policies of the DPP, locally or towards the mainland? Or was it just simply voter fatigue? These are the questions. Fortunately, I'm the moderator. I don't have to answer them. And so we have our panel today. And our panel today consists of Lev Nachman, who is at National Chengchi University, Jiahong Tsai, who is also at National Chengchi University and at Harvard this year, and Sara Newland, who's at Smith College. So I'll ask Jiahong to go first, please. Jiahong, sorry. Jiahong to go first, please. Jiahong, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, it's really yeah. Let me click my watch. Okay. Yeah, it's really an honor to be here, and yeah, we have talked about the election before. I mean, last November. So some of the thoughts have been shared in the pre-election workshop, but I'm going to explain a little bit about the election and try to answer Steve's questions. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this is should be the one. Okay, so I think can everybody see my slides well? So so the topic is the afterthoughts about 2022 Taiwan local elections. Because I think we have already kind of like predict the election before what's happening, and most of the predictions are really close to the fact. So so I'm going to talk about the results and maybe a little bit the explanation, and I'm trying. But I will try to focus on the political landscape of Taiwan. I mean, because we have not received the latest election data yet, so maybe I'm not able to explain election in the individual level. But I do have some data collected before the election. Although the data is not directly related to the election, but I think we can have some clue, especially about the partisanship and independence unification issue position from the mass level, and we can try to maybe have a picture about what will change after the election. And because I was asked to watch the polling in this session, so I will also comment on the polling and maybe try to share my observation about the polling. Okay, so the election were held in, let me see if I can enter full screen. Okay, so election were held on November 26, 2022. And as you may see, the map, actually the map was from the Japanese scholar who predicted that the DPP can only win 4 or up to 5 seats in the mayor elections. So you can see actually his pre-election forecast is very accurate. So basically, DPP only won 5 seats, and the TPP won 1 seat in Hsinchu City. But for the mayor, the elected mayor right now maybe in trouble because her misuse of her some money in her legislator office, and the KMT won 15 seats. So it's pretty so you can see the green it's pretty clear cut, right? I mean, the penguin is only controlling the southern Taiwan. So so the question is, did the KMT really win? So I think the biggest victory comes from Taipei City and the Taoyuan City, because 8 years ago the KMT lost these two cities, and right now both of cities are under control of the KMT, and furthermore, the KMT candidates are really trailing the DVB candidates in Tainan and the Pingtung County. So so compared to 2018, the KMT candidates won bigger votes in 6 metropolitan cities, but not too many votes in other county or cities. Okay, so so you can see that the KMT is really getting back to the game. Okay, but regarding the city council election, I mean, some people are talking about the DVB actually did very good in the city council election, but according to my count, the DVB actually lose 15 seats in metropolitan cities, but remain the same in other city and county compared to 2014. I mean, if you only look at 2018 and 2022, maybe you will say, oh, the DVB is doing very well in a city council election. But if you look at, if you make the window bigger and compare to 2014, actually the DVB has, you can say, has been back to the normal, but not getting bigger in the city council election. Okay, so so overall, the KMT shows their strengths in local politics. I will argue that it will be partly because of the legacy of the authoritarian regime. I mean, people still believe in the priority of economic development over maybe social justice or over rule of law. And then incumbents are also very good at emphasizing their governance. Okay, they will say, "Oh, I will focus on my job right now. I'm not talking about the re-election until the very late stage," and they try to avoid any confrontations with challenges. Okay, so if we look at this graph, you will I mean the graph is based on the data I collected in 2021 and 2022. You may say, oh, the DVP is a little bit has a little bit step back in terms of party identification, because a year ago the DVP has 28 or close to 29% of partisans, but in 2022 the number is down to 23.5. So you may say, oh, the DVP is not as popular as before, but actually the DVP is still if you add KMT and the TPP, you will find that the both non-green parties can outnumber the DVP, but a year ago it's not the case. Okay, and so I think 下架民进党, I mean get rid of the DVP is really a good slogan for the KMT and the TPP. Okay, but still it's not easy to explain why the KMT can win the election. So I will offer a couple explanations. First of all, the independence probably linked to the KMT and the vote accordingly. I mean, look at the map, look at the graph, you can see, oh, there are so many independents, just like in United States. They may be motivated to say they are independents, but actually they are pro KMT or pro the incumbents. Okay, and second explanation maybe some DPP partisans are not going out to vote, or they even switch to the TPP. And the third explanation is that the DPP partisans are highly populated in southern Taiwan. So even though you can see many, you can see the bigger proportion of DPP identified than KMT and the DPP, but if they are mostly from southern Taiwan, then it doesn't help DPP in northern Taiwan. Okay, and I will further, I think many people are interested in how young voters think about the political parties. And actually, I already talked about that in the pre-election workshop, but I'd like to share the graph. I cannot share the numbers because during before the election, we are not supposed to talk about popular opinion polls. Otherwise, I will be fined by the election law, right? So, if you can look at the legends of the party, you can see that among the 20 to 20 years old people, they actually lose some zeal or some passion about for the DPP, right? The color becomes shorter, and so is the 30 to 39 years old category. You can see the bar is becoming shorter, right? But at the same time, this group since to lean to the TPP in 1 year, right? You can see the bar is becoming taller. So is this group, right? And so you, according to the very primary observation, you can say the DPP becomes less popular among many age groups. And the most serious problem for the DPP is they seems to lose support among the young generation. Okay, so what's the implication about the party landscape and the future relations with mainland China? So we want to answer this question, and so we look at the independence and implication issue position, also for our survey in 2021 and 2022. But you can see the stability of the independence and the implication issue position. So status quo remains the most popular option, and the independence is actually getting a bigger part of the story. Okay, so 25% of people prefer independence in 2021, and in 2022, maybe because of the policy visit, or maybe because the COVID-19. 28% of people say they prefer independence. At the same time, implication is remaining the same. So if you consider the sampling error, you may say, oh, this issue position is quite stable and quite steady, right? And so in this case, yeah, it's hard to say the election outcome. I mean, the local election outcome will change the stability or independence implication issue or independence view. But I would suggest that as many analysis argue, the stability will continue, and and you will not see very big change after the election. And so how about the age group? And if you look at the graph here, you can say voters under 39 years old support less status quo, but more independence than last year. So actually the bar is becoming taller, right? The bar here, and this bar also becomes taller, right? So based on the graph, you will the results implies that young voters may have motivation to support the DPP in the presidential election, but the TPP compete with the DPP on the median voter. I mean, if the DPP still have some issue ownership on the independence and unification issue, the TPP actually is competing with DPP on this issue, and because the DPP argue that we don't have to confront with China or United States, and this kind of discourse may have some attraction. Okay, so the narrative of the status quo in terms of the prosperity and the security, I think, is very key to political leadership. Okay, I just have some very quick observation about the polling. Overall, I think different polls are doing a good job regarding prediction the winner or the loser of each county and city. And it seems that most people made a decision as early as 10 days before election day, because within the last 10 days, no poll is allowed to publish. So you can see the polls are really accurate, even 10 days before the election day. Having said that, we still find some poll DPP organizations releasing quite biased poll results. So we have to be cautious about their credibility. We are waiting for post-election survey yet to test our hypotheses, such as negative voting, evidence on the COVID-19 policies, and the low visibility of DPP candidates due to delayed nomination. Okay, so my conclusion is the local election is a disaster for the DPP, just like 2018. So the ruling party needs some policy overhaul and new leadership in the post-Tsai era. However, the KMT didn't really expand its social base either. So compared to 2018, the KMT actually lost like 400,000 votes, and the DPP lost 260,000 votes. So the KMT, I think, have to think about how to decide a nominee in the future presidential election to avoid a nightmare. So it's possible that there will be a three-party race, but I mean, there lots of uncertainty there, right? And so I expect that the candidates will adopt more moderate rhetoric toward China and may emphasize more on domestic politics. Okay, I will stop here. And any question or suggestion are very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jiahong. Lev?
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much again for throwing a post-election party event. I'll start with, I have a cold, so normally my enthusiasm for talking about elections is at a 10 out of 10. So if I'm coming across at only about an 8 out of 10, it's just because my voice is a little shot. I think this election, I think, really shocked a lot of international observers, more than anything, because I think the expectation from an international media perspective is that the DPP is the only game in town. The KMT is flailing Tsai Ing-wen is so incredibly popular. How could the DPP possibly have a bad election? And I think there is perhaps now a more appreciation that opinions about parties and politicians vary far more domestically in Taiwan than we typically give them credit for. Now, I'll get into more about that in a second, but I want to start with perhaps one of the most frustrating answers to Steve's question, which is why did things happen the way they did? And the answer is we don't know. There is no exit polling in Taiwan. It's illegal. And surveys asking post hoc, why did you vote the way you did, are going to be biased. So ultimately, I don't know why people voted the way they did. And I think anyone that's convinced that they know exactly why people voted the way they did are not basing that off data. But we have some hypotheses. We have some pretty good hypotheses about why we think people voted the way they did. People talk about COVID and the COVID response and how people were frustrated by slowing economic development, by how a lot of small and medium level businesses were not feeling this windfall that I think TSMC was feeling this last year. I think there was general frustration with how long COVID policies were lasting in terms of just travel restrictions and quarantine. I think that was an issue. I think these are all just different variables that might have contributed to why people voted the way they did, but there is no one single thing that I think points to why people voted the way they did overwhelmingly. There was a major coordination problem with the DPP this local election. The agenda was not clear because at the very senior level, you had President Tsai talking about Kangzongbaotai, this idea of resist China, protect Taiwan. That is not what people at the local level were talking about. Not only that, no one really at the local level had major, national security related policies whatsoever, except maybe Chen Sejong, who spent some time talking about it. But ultimately, there was a disconnect between what the DPP as a party was saying and what candidates were talking about. And of course, we know that if there was one thing that defined this election, it was not policy, it was scandals. So much of the rhetoric this election was talking about whose candidates were of a lower quality, who plagiarized their thesis, who took money from whom, who maybe murdered someone back in the 90s. That's what this was. The election was largely talked about. You can actually go back. I have to shout out New Bloom and Brian Hugh, who actually listened to every single debate that was televised and took notes about everything that all the mayoral and county magistrate candidates talked about, and hardly any of them talked about policy. That was not what people were particularly inspired to talk about. Again, maybe people still voted on policy. We really don't know. But that's not what the candidates were talking about, nor was it particularly what the major parties were talking about. Low turnout. This was, we did not even get to 60% this election. We were at 66% in the last local election. I think COVID played a part in that. I think there was some 50,000, I think, plus voters who could not vote. And while 50,000 in a country of nearly 24 million might not seem like a lot, for certain races, that could have made or break. You also have the hypothesis that the youth have soured on the DPP. I don't think there is enough data for that to be a strong enough point yet, because I think the DPP, the youth vote in Taipei may have soured somewhat and gravitated towards the TPP. But the idea of a nationwide young people not supporting the DPP being sort of the Achilles heel of this local election, I think cannot explain the DPP's bad results. Perhaps more than anything because young people vote the least. That's true in Taiwan and that's true in every democracy. So if it was that small bit of young voters that the DPP was really hoping to win it over, then I think the DPP, that's the least of the DPP's problems. There's also the hypothesis that local elections are about local issues. This is something I talked about at our first seminar, we have a lot of public opinion data that shows that during national elections, the China cleavage is the most important thing that motivates voting behavior. We don't have public opinion data that talks about what is the most salient issue during local elections. The common wisdom that local issues dominate local elections is not really supported by data, which is not to say it's wrong. I just don't know. And based off of the amount of scandals that were talked about this local election, I would guess that it's reasonable to say that without data, I'm not convinced that this idea of who's building roads, who's taking care of community building, who's providing goods is driving elections as much as I think that explanation sort of gives us the impression that it is. So if it sounds like I'm saying a lot of hypotheses and then saying why I don't think they can explain why people voted the way they did, it's because I think it is a bit of an enigma trying to explain why people voted the way they did during this local election. As Jiahong pointed out, I think that there is a larger historical story of the KMT's networks in a lot of parts of Taiwan that tell a much more realistic story about what drives voting behavior. And it's not necessarily policies, and it's not necessarily local issues, but instead networks. But this is my hypothesis, and it's just as valid as anyone else's because I don't have the research to show that to be true yet. So just to highlight a few of the main races, we had the very contentious Taipei race between Chen Sezhong, Jiang Wan'an, and Huang Sansan. So this was controversial because Chen Sezhong was the former leader of Taiwan's COVID response, and a lot of his legitimacy was now staked to this race. You have Jiang Wan'an, the great grandson of Chiang Kai-shek, and you have Huang Sansan, who is the former deputy mayor to Kowenze. So Jiang Wan'an won. He didn't win by a giant landslide, but he won. Chen Sezhong came in second. He ran the best mayoral race that the DPP has run in Taipei since 2010, when Su Zhangcheng ran. Huang Sansan did really bad. I didn't expect that. I thought Huang Sansan was going to do much better than she did. The TPP has been floating her name for mayor for at least 3 or 4 years now. So the fact that, and there was so much hype around her, that the fact that at the very end she performed so poorly, I think is a big shock for the TPP and for Ke's hopeful presidential run in 2024. Chen Sezhong ran probably the best campaign he probably could have for the DPP, but I think it's important to keep in mind that the DPP has had disastrous races in Taipei for a long time now, and that them losing in Taipei is normal. And it's sort of that point that I think it's really important to compare 2018 to 2020, because on paper, 2022, on paper, 2022 was just as bad for the DPP as 2018. But over here, people are not reacting to it in the same shock and disbelief that we did in 2018. So why is that? Why did 2018 feel qualitatively worse than 2022, even though they were both really bad for the DPP? 2018 had Han Kuo-yu. It had a giant populist person kind of in front and center. It had 10 very confusing referendums tied to social issues that I think the results of made Taiwan feel very homophobic and conservative socially. And most importantly, the Han Kuo-yu's victory in the South in Kaohsiung was shocking because the DPP is not supposed to lose in Kaohsiung. Now, compared to the 2022 results, the DPP largely lost in the North. That's not great for the DPP, but we can explain that far better than we can the DPP losing in the South. The DPP losing in Taoyuan and Hsinchu is not great for them, but that does not have the same shock and awe as the DPP losing in Kaohsiung as it did in 2018. And so even though on paper, this is a bad election for the DPP, it's not feeling as disastrous as perhaps 2018 did. So looking forward, what is the prospects for the next few years for each of these parties? So Tsai stepped down as party chair, and that means that there is going to be a big reshuffling of DPP party factions. Now, this was going to happen because Tsai only has a year left in office anyway, but this fast forwards that timeline quite a bit because now we don't know who's going to be in charge of the DPP. There's names floating around whether or not Chen Chi-mai, the mayor of Kaohsiung, whether or not he will throw his hat in the race, whether or not Lai Ching-te, the current vice president himself, will throw his hat in the race. And Lai is pretty much the guaranteed front runner for the DPP. Once upon a time, Tsai and her factions were hoping to put up some competition to Lai Ching-te, but now that she's no longer party chair, that's pretty much going to be dead on arrival. And so, pending some major scandal or major event domestically, the nomination is pretty much Lai Ching-te's to lose. The KMT did well this election, or at the very least, they did not do disastrously. And that's enough to give them some amount of positive momentum going into the next presidential election. There's going to be a lot of discussion about Hou Youyi versus Eric Chu. Eric Chu never had the presidential run that he wanted because 2016 was just so bad for him that I think it's a pretty open secret that he would like to run for president again. However, Hou Youyi is more popular than he is. The KMT is going to have a lot of very big discussions over the next year about who they feel is the better candidate. But someone I want to keep on everyone's mind is Lu Xiuyan, the current mayor of Taichung, who won in a landslide, surprisingly. And Lu is interesting because she is one of the only politicians from the Han wave of 2018 that is still around. She's not only very popular, but she's one of the few popular women in the KMT, which makes her a very easy and strong pick for vice president, whether or not Eric Chu or Hou Youyi is the presidential nominee. And whether or not Lu herself has presidential ambitions, I think is something to keep your eyes on as well. But she's definitely someone I see in the KMT going forward. Finally, the TPP, I think Ko Wen-je is still going to try his best to run for president, but he did not get the victory that he really wanted. Gao Hong'an, the now mayor of Hsinchu, who won on behalf of the TPP, is still entrenched in scandals. And her loyalty to Ke versus her loyalty to her former boss, Terry Go, I think is going to be in question. And whether or not she can rally the TPP vote for Ko Wen-je for president, I think is something that I'm not sure will happen. I think really Ke needed Huang Sansan to do better in order for him to feel the momentum that he really wanted for his presidential run. So Ke might run no matter what because ego, but he's not going to have the same momentum that he would have if Huang Sansan had done better. Because I'm professionally obligated to say something about small parties. Small parties did bad. The New Power Party, the Taiwan State Building Party, the Green Party did not do well. This was maybe the worst local election for small parties in quite some time. Comparatively, in 2018, the New Power Party fielded 47 candidates and won 16 city councilors. This time they fielded over 50 and they won 6. So it was a big defeat for the New Power Party. Technically, on paper, the Taiwan State Building Party won 2 city councilors. That's a 200% increase for them because they had never won a city councilor before. But 2 city councilors is not great considering that they've been struggling to really recover their footing ever since Chen Bo-wei was recalled and then left the party. And then finally, the Green Party really struggled as well, not winning any seats in Taipei. And of course, a handful of other small parties, the Obasan Alliance, did not win any. The new party won 1 seat in Taipei. They still technically exist, but small parties are kind of set up to be in a very difficult spot. Ever since sort of the decline of the New Power Party, they've really sort of lost their footing. And those that are looking for a third option seem to be flocking more and more to the TPP, regardless of policy. So in the lead up to the next year, it's worth keeping in mind that the next presidential election is literally just a year away from next month. It's very soon. So Taiwan practices its ABCs. It's always be campaigning. And I think the primaries are going to be coming up very, very soon. And, I think the DPP is going to be looking at the election. So the DPP is scrambling to figure out what went wrong. And the DPP has just as much trouble as we do because the DPP would like to know why people didn't vote for them. And they are running on hypotheses just like we're running on hypotheses. And I think their reaction is to, 1, try to appeal to young people, because I think the DPP feels young people is the key. And I think the DPP is going to do something related to domestic policy, things like housing, taxes, wages, only because even though we know that China will become the most salient issue in 2024, the DPP will likely try to pass something between now and then to check a box to say, look, we addressed the issues that were plaguing voters in 2022. My worry is that if we look comparatively to 2020, the DPP passed the anti-infiltration law, the Fan Shento bill, weeks before the presidential election in order to say, look, we passed a bill against infiltration. The contents of that bill were shallow and largely ineffective because it was passed in a hurry as a means to say, look, we passed something. Now, given that the DPP only has 1 year to try to win over voters, I anticipate that they will try to pass policy, but I worry about what the quality of that policy will look like for the next year, because it will largely be reactive in the hope of winning back some of those voters that either were disenfranchised with the DPP or protest voted against the DPP this election. So what is to say in conclusion, the party is just getting started because the next big one is already on the front of everyone's minds over here. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much. I look forward to questions and discussion after.
Lev, thank you very much. Let me remind our audience that if you have any questions, use the Q&A button, and I will be monitoring it. Sara, you're up.
Thanks. So yeah, I want to kind of underscore a couple of points that Professor Tsai and Professor Nachman made. So the first is that I think all of us are in agreement that it's worth pushing back a little bit against what has come to be the dominant English language media narrative about these elections, which is that they were a sort of disastrous and maybe surprising loss for the DPP. I think one of the things that's important to take away, I agree with Professor Tsai about this, is that this election is not really an outright win for any of the major parties. So certainly for the KMT or the DPP, but also I think for the TPP, the messages are a little bit more mixed. And what your takeaway is really depends on what your point of reference is. So, clearly, the DPP would have loved to win some of the seats that they lost, and some of the seats that flipped, like the mayor of Taoyuan. Current mayor is a DPP mayor. The next mayor will be a KMT mayor. Like those feel like big losses, but that also is not a seat that historically was a DPP seat. And so if you compare this election to 2014, when the DPP did really well, it looks like this was a disastrous loss for the DPP. If you compare it to 2018, it doesn't really look that different to me, right? I mean, the DPP did lose one, more seat, but they picked up a couple of seats at the city council level. And, it just seems in some ways like we have to think about some broader patterns. Like, first of all, the fact that we've had now three local elections in a row, 2014, 2018, 2022, where the party that has held the presidency has really struggled. And so I think part of this is just a sort of longer term, it seems like, as is often the case, for instance, in midterms in the US, where the president's party tends to do poorly, that seems to have happened in the last three elections in Taiwan as well. And so, I think that's important to keep in mind. I think also Professor Tsai's point about turnout, about how many fewer people voted for both the KMT and the DPP in this election, is important to keep in mind. That, it seems like, yes, it's true that the DPP struggled to bring voters to kind of excite voters and get them to the polls. But that also, I think, is something that the KMT will need to think about as well. And obviously, the national election in 2024 is a really different story. And so, struggles with turnout in this election don't necessarily mean that the parties will struggle in the same way in 2024, but I'm sure it is something that they are kind of watching. So I want to talk about just a couple of sort of general things. So one is, Taiwan has a history of third party or three-way elections leading to surprising results, right? So if we think about something like Chen Shui-bian winning the presidency in 2000 as a result of a split in the KMT, we know that, having a third candidate in a big race can make a big difference. And so I think that it's really important, even though the TPP probably, as Lev was saying, would have liked to see Huang Shanshan do better. I do think that this question about what the role of the TPP is going to be moving forward is one of the big things that we have to watch coming out of this election. And so, certainly, even though Huang Shanshan came in a pretty distant third, anyone who's capable of winning a significant number of votes obviously has the potential to sway elections. And so I think that's something that we have to think about if Ko Wen-je decides to run for president, but also just more generally moving forward in terms of elections in Taiwan, that it does seem like, obviously the TPP didn't even exist as a party in 2014, right? So there's a new phenomenon, and a lot of people clearly are finding something appealing in the TPP's message. I think, as Professor Tsai was saying, your slides I thought were really interesting, looking at sort of who seems to be like supporting the TPP. And I think there's a lot of questions, and in part it's sort of hard to parse because there are things that seem really contradictory, right? So when you look at party ID by vote on party ID by age on Professor Tsai's slides, it seems like young people are drawn to the TPP, and that's like consistent with what we know from, qualitative evidence. We also, at this point, I think most people think of the TPP as a pan-blue party, and so would expect it maybe to draw more votes from the KMT than the DPP. But the KMT skews older than the DPP, right? And so, I think that it's sort of complicated to think through who's gonna suffer more. My expectation at this point, I guess, is that a TPP candidate for president or in any other three-way race is going to pull perhaps more votes from the KMT than from the DPP. But also, if it's true that young voters are becoming disillusioned with the DPP, and it sounds like there's a little bit of a disagreement about that point, maybe between Lev and Professor Tsai. I think there's some question about like which party is going to suffer more if the TPP starts to really regularly contest elections. So, as Lev said, there's still a lot that's in the realm of hypothesis rather than data. We don't really know, but I do think that that's something that is really important to kind of keep an eye on moving forward. So I think I'm trying to think what else I wanted to say as the sort of cleanup here. I wanted to go back to this point that both of the other speakers made about the sort of local effectiveness of the KMT's ground game and the kind of legacies of the authoritarian period. And so, to fill in a little bit more detail about that, I mean, I think part of this has to do with just kind of local governing, like long-time local governing experience, as I think Professor Tsai was talking about. But a lot of it also has to do with networks of voter mobilization and vote buying. And, the KMT was an authoritarian party that ruled through elections in the same way that, say that the PRI did in Mexico for a long time, right? And so I think there's like many decades of experience, even prior to the democratic era in Taiwan, of local, sort of local vote brokers turning out voters to support KMT candidates, right? And I think one of the things that was an open question is whether those networks would be taken apart or made ineffective by the KMT's emphasis on restorative justice when it came into office, right? And so whether some of the things like freezing some of the KMT's assets, turning the KMT from the wealthiest political party in the world into a party that had significantly less cash on hand, whether that would sort of undermine the KMT's ability to effectively turn out voters at the local level. And so I think it's interesting that that doesn't seem to have happened, right? That the KMT still seems to be quite effective at turning out local voters for some of these races, ranging from mayor all the way down to, like in the US, we talk about the dog catcher as the kind of, epitome of the ultra local election, right? But these people who are really responsible for very, very sort of bread and butter, like getting the street light turned back on if it goes out, kind of public services. The KMT seems to continue to have a strong ground game in turning out voters for those elections. And so I think that that is an important, kind of point of continuity. I think it it points to a way in which, although Taiwan's democracy is very robust, the fact that it emerged out of an authoritarian system with a very, very strong party structure continues to put a little bit of a thumb on the scale for the KMT today. And I think sometimes that gets lost. As Lev was saying, I think there's this narrative in foreign media that the DPP is totally dominant and the KMT is sort of like this dinosaur that's dying off. And I think the fact that the KMT's messaging on the cross-strait issue does not appeal to very many voters is a fundamental challenge for the KMT in national elections. But I think these structural advantages that it holds are continue to be very relevant and continue to make it quite a strong party at the local level. I think the last thing that I wanted to talk about was the sort of DPP messaging in this election. And, you know, it seems like it's hard, as Lev was saying, it's hard to know exactly why people did vote the way that they did, but it doesn't seem like two kinds of messages were particularly effective, right? And so one was this effort, as Lev was saying, mostly by Tsai to sort of position, to tie these elections to the cross-strait issue, right? To tie them to this message around, you know, sort of like resisting China, protecting Taiwan. That message does not seem to have been very effective at getting people to the polls. And then the second piece is there was, you know, a pretty strong effort in some DPP races, I think, to really focus on the corruption issue and to, you know, focus on the ways in which disproportionately KMT candidates were the ones who were being, you know, had like a murder conviction or, you know, various other signs of corruption. Some TPP candidates too, also Professor Tsai mentioned that this now elected TPP mayor is in some trouble for misuse of funds and like being abusive to her staff and stuff. But so, you know, those messages I think are, did not seem to be ones that really motivated tons of people to come out to the polls. So in some ways, I just think that's interesting, that the corruption issue, I think, is something that people still regard as fairly common in local politics in Taiwan, and yet it doesn't seem to be something that voters, you know, turn out to vote against. And part of that just may be that the DPP rather also had its own challenges with things like plagiarism scandals. And so I don't really think of plagiarism as rising to the level of like political corruption, but you know, I do think that it wasn't, you know, they had a sort of messy campaign too, and so that may have undermined the strength of that message a little bit. So I think that was everything that I wanted to say. Thank you to the prior panel participants for saying lots of the things that I think are important to say about this election. So maybe we'll just turn it over to questions.
Okay. I've got, let me first, do any of you like to respond to each other? Sara sort of brought up a couple of points and about what Lev had said and Jiahong had said. Do you feel that you want to respond? You don't feel that you want to respond. Okay. Let me raise a rather large question. Taiwan was part of the democratic wave at the end of the 20th century, and that wave has certainly ebbed and in some cases retreated. And one of the questions that we used to ask maybe 15 years ago concerned the viability of democracy in Taiwan. How is democracy doing? Democracy has failed in so many other states, and it seems to be still viable in Taiwan. If you were asked to look at the local elections and to look at them as a barometer of Taiwan's progress towards maintaining a democratic system, how would you rate it? And what would your criteria be? Is that too big a question?
Yeah, I think I can try to answer Steve's question, but everyone can jump in anytime. So, right, I think this local election, like the previous ones, has lots of scandals and lots of negative things like vote buying and attack on personality. And yeah, I think because I've been the commissioners of the Central Election Commission for 4 years, and after the election, we spend lots of time to look at many cases, and some of the city councilors are convicted, and they lose their job, lose their positions. So so the quality of the election and is still has still lots of room to improve. And of course, the election itself, the regularity is very good, and the efficiency is very high. But there still it seems that there are still many unqualified candidates are loaded in the election, right? So I think you may argue that the function of the political parties is not it's not really in full swing. I mean, maybe political parties have to compromise in the candidate nomination because I think Taiwan may enter the period of electoral competition too fast, so it makes people to perceive democracy as election, but nothing else. Okay, I think I have a project with my colleagues, and we look at the democratic value for the past maybe 25 years. We find that people subscribe to the value of equality and maybe rule of law, but they don't. But it seems that they don't really believe in check and balance or separation of powers. So even though we are rated very high by the Freedom House every year, but still it seems that some pieces of the puzzle are not there. So of course you can brand political culture like authoritarianism, the authoritarian legacy, but I don't know. Maybe we should also ask our political parties to work harder, to really look at the balance between electoral victory and the quality of candidates, and try to formulate a better way to control our candidates and to promote people who are really want to do public service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to jump in on that. So, all of us study politics in Taiwan, and I think as a result, we tend to like focus on the nitpicky little details, right? And I think that I agree with Professor Tsai that I don't think Taiwan's democracy is perfect. But I also think that it's important as a big picture to focus on how amazing Taiwan's democratic progress has been. And there is, as far as I can think of, no perfect democracy in the United States, in the world, right? And if you think about the United States, some of these same challenges around nominating low quality candidates you know, the political parties are pretty powerful in the United States, right? And they can't control their nomination processes in some cases, right? And so, you know, I think that it's, I think it's important not to hold Taiwan's democracy up to an unreasonable standard that no place in the world can meet. And, you know, I think it's an interesting moment to think about Taiwan's democracy in the context of the protests that have been happening in mainland China this week. And, you know, some of those protests have been really about the COVID restrictions, but some of them have been demands for more political freedom, right? And I think one of the things that is incredibly challenging for people who try to think about a different political future and what that might look like in China is, how would you get there, right? Like, how would you get to the point of holding democratic elections? Who would be the alternative to the Communist Party? And that is such an incredibly difficult transition to make. And that transition was not foreordained in Taiwan either, right? Coming out of a tradition in which the military dictatorship was incredibly strong. The tools of coercion were very brutal. And, you know, the one-party control really extended down to the grassroots in a very effective way. So the fact that Taiwan now is a place, you know, I wish everyone could go and like see a presidential election in Taiwan, because I think for people living in places where there's a lot of, you know, dissatisfaction and disillusionment with democracy, I think they're incredibly moving, right? That people across the political spectrum are really invested in voting. They think of democracy not just as something you do one day every 2 years or 4 years, but something that's like a cultural value in Taiwan and something that people are very proud of. And so, you know, there are things like the, you know, fistfights in the legislature and the, you know, local problems with vote buying. And like, I do think that these are problems and there are ways in which Taiwan's democracy can continue to deepen. But I think it's important to also maintain a focus on the big picture that Taiwan has been a remarkable success story. And there are very few other places in the world that have been as successful at making that transition.
Yeah, I second everything Sara just said. As a registered Nebraska voter, there's a non-trivial number of people in my home state who still think Donald Trump won the 2020 election. And to be in Taiwan and to see these two parties, so affective polarization is a problem in Taiwan. It's a worse problem in the United States, but it's certainly a problem in Taiwan. But even with an affective polarization problem, no one questions the legitimacy of the system. People admit defeat. Candidates admit defeat. They don't say it was rigged. No one challenged any results here. And boy, is that refreshing after being an American in for the last chunk of time, and having to live through an election where one of the main presidential candidates was not willing to admit defeat. And it's features like that really remind me that there are so much about Taiwan that other democracies can in fact learn from, and even, you know, fully agreeing with Professor Tsai that Taiwan's democracy is far from perfect, and boy, is there work to do still. But so many of the issues that, you know, just looking at some of the candidates in this last election in the United States, and you know, the Georgia election was just the last 48 hours, and seeing one of their candidates being just as bonkers as some of the candidates that we see in Taiwan every now and then. This is a problem for democracies all over the world. But, you know, things that Taiwan does well is, like Sara said, there is a value for democracy. Whether or not people fully understand what it means when they say they value democracy, I think is a question worth interrogating. But at the very least, that's what comes to people's mind when they ask, what do you value as a Taiwanese citizen? The fact that you have so you know, we're kvetching that there was only a 59% turnout rate for a local election. That's incredible in most other countries in the world. The fact that Taiwan has to you know, grovel that it was such a low turnout rate at not even breaking 60% is just I think really just speaks to the quality of Taiwan's democracy. One thing that does hurt the quality of Taiwan's democracy, and this is something that we did not talk about, was the referendum to lower the voting age to 18 that did not pass. because that really sticks out for Taiwan. I don't know many advanced democracies like Taiwan where the voting age is still at 20 years old. And the fact that not only did the referendum not pass, but a lot of people just voted against it. And that one I really have a tough time explaining, because I think there was just a lot of people who still feel that if you're too young, you shouldn't vote. And I think that is something that Taiwan, when addressing its quality of democracy, needs to work on, because that referendum not passing means that there is most certainly work to be done.
Yeah, the thing about, just to extend that a little bit, the thing about the referendum not passing, in part, I'm sure has to do with the issue, but also with the procedure. The requirement that the Constitution can only be amended by more than 50% of eligible voters makes it very difficult to amend the Constitution. And it's something that some of us in dialogue with the mainland always point out to them, that when they talk about the possible amendment of the Constitution, that structurally it's terribly difficult in Taiwan, and it isn't going to happen on a whim. That's an interesting point, Lev. I thought, Sara, you said something about the Kuomintangs being strong in structure at the local level, but weak in policy. If we take up the question of the transition to the island-wide elections 2 years from now, does strong in local and weak in policy give the KMT any hope of coming back? What do you think? What does anybody think? I didn't mean to direct that directly at Sara.
I think,
yeah, go
sorry.
on.
Just again, going back to the data that we have, we know that China is the most salient issue during presidential elections. And for the last 2 presidential elections, people have not agreed with the KMT's China policy. What local elections, what the support from local elections will do for the KMT is it will make sure that their base of support still votes for the KMT. And we saw that in the last few presidential elections, even though the KMT lost the presidency, just looking at 2020, if you look at the breakdown by party vote, the KMT still got 1/3 of the vote, same as the DPP, same as third parties. So the KMT's base of support will still support them. But when it comes to president, that is the KMT's weak game. And that's what matters the most for national elections. And the best local election in the world for the KMT does not guarantee them a strong presidential run unless they can get really good at talking about the 92 consensus really quickly, which good luck to them.
Yeah, I guess I would say that I think I agree. I think the KMT has themselves trapped in a corner a little bit, right, where they don't seem able to articulate a new vision of a policy toward cross-strait relations, but their old vision of what the relationship between China and Taiwan should be appeals to fewer and fewer voters, in part just because their core supporters are sort of dying off year by year, right? And so if they can't fix that problem, it's unclear to me what their long-term future is. At the same time, I think that the DPP has some challenges too. And so, it was clear if we think back to the results of the 2020 election, President Tsai did better than the DPP candidates in the down ballot races did, right? So, she won a historically large number of votes, but that didn't necessarily translate into voters then supporting DPP candidates for the legislative races. And so I think that this question of what a post-Tsai DPP looks like is going to be a real challenge for the DPP moving forward. And Lev already talked about, the fact that Tsai has stepped down as the party chair, and that sort of puts Lai Ching-te in, probably the dominant position in terms of getting the nomination for 2024. Obviously in Taiwan, there's often a lot of like reshuffling and surprises that happen in the, pre-nomination period. And so we'll see what happens. I don't think he's, has like 100% chance of being the nominee, but I agree that he's on stronger footing than anyone else. But more generally, it's not completely clear to me that he would win the same kind of like widespread popular support that she has gotten. And so I think, but there also isn't someone else who's obvious, who's like waiting in the wings as the next star of the DPP if Lai were not to be the nominee in 2024. And so, I do think that there's just this challenge of when you have someone who has been quite overall quite a popular president. I mean, obviously she's had sort of dips and rises in her popularity, but on the whole, people have turned out to vote for her. What happens when that person then is a lame duck president and there isn't like a clear next star waiting in the wings? So, I think that's more of like a personnel challenge than a structural challenge. But I think that both parties, it's going to be interesting to watch what happens in 2024 because both parties in different ways, I think, have some serious challenges ahead of them.
Yeah, I think it's a good term to describe KMT's status, which is strong in local public policy. But I think there are some signs that the KMT is trying to adopting more moderate position on the Taiwan-China relations. I mean, for example, they open embassy in the United States and they're trying to approach more local politicians and the local Taiwanese United States. And they also try to. I think that the KMT is learning not to be so overly pro-China, and they are trying to do it like subtly, and maybe they will still have strong link between KMT and the Communist Party, but I think they're learning not to make it too public and try to argue that we still need to engage China, we still have to understand China, but at the same time, our best interest is to work with United States, and so you can see lots of information regarding, for example, TSMC investing in United States, and you can see lots of information regarding the technology of Taiwan will be hollowing out by the United States, and it's kind of like a subtle operation by those pro-China media, and they try to sell the message that Taiwan can think about the alternative way instead of cooperating with United States. So I think right now maybe it's not easy it's not easy as I mean it's not as easy as 2020 that you can just point out that the KMT is definitely for China. Maybe you have to spend lots of time persuading people that DPP is really different from KMT, and DPP's is the party can ensure Taiwan security. I think right now the interdependence between Taiwan, China, and the United States is more complex than before. So I think if DPP is still holding status quo as her as its only slogan or its only call for mobilizing their supporters. Maybe the KMT can think about a better way to persuade people that status quo on condition of something else, which is better for Taiwan in the future. So I think the DPP, maybe it's good for Taiwan's future, but I think from the DPP perspective, the DPP really have to think about how to reframe status quo in terms of prosperity and the security, and trying to be maybe a little bit open-minded regarding the new international politics.
Thank you. I think this has been a good session, and I just want to thank the participants and thank the audience. The thought that comes to my mind as we talk about this last question is that the relationship between the United States and China in the next year is going to be an important determinant of the relative effectiveness of the cross-strait policies of the two major parties. That is, if as things seem to be happening now, there is any kind of improvement in the relationship between the United States and China, and if that's translated into both sides taking a more moderate policy towards the cross-strait issue, then the Kuomintang position of maintaining some ties with the mainland and accusing the DPP of being overly hostile towards the mainland might have some effectiveness. If things sour, this new attempt by the United States and China to improve relations, if that sours, then of course the DPP, I think, to a certain extent benefits, and the Kuomintang's attempt to find a middle position becomes more difficult. So there is an international element also to the future of Taiwan elections. Anyway, I've enjoyed this and I've learned a lot. And I want to thank Sara, and I want to thank Jiahong, and I want to thank Lev for taking part. The Taiwan workshop group at Harvard will be going to Taiwan the second week in January, and we'll be spending a week there, and we will have another panel discussion probably in early February talking about the results of our visit. So thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you all again in February.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Professor
Harry.
Goldstein. And thanks to all our attendees today. Thank you.
Have a great day.
And you, thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.